A relative pronoun is used to introduce what we call a relative clause. It's used to combine two sentences that have a noun in common and that noun which has previously been mentioned. It has two major functions. So a relative pronoun can be used to stand in as a pronoun to a word that was previously mentioned, and we call that previously mentioned word the antecedent. It's also used to introduce what's called a subordinate clause. We're going to take a look at what these two words mean in a few moments. Let's take a look at these two sentences. The cat smells bad and the cat ran through the yard. We originally said that a relative pronoun could be used to combine two sentences that share a noun in common. Well, the noun that they share in common is the cat. We want to take these two sentences now and combine them into one. So, we notice that they both have in common the cat. And if we break the two sentences down from there, then we see the cat smells bad, and then the cat ran through the yard. So since they have cat in common, I don't want to duplicate that word. So instead, let's bring down the cat as the main part of our sentence, and bring down the two other meanings. But now we have a blank. The cat blank smells bad, ran through the yard. The object that would be put right here is what we call the relative pronoun. And in English, this is one of those words like which, who, that. So the cat, which smells bad, ran through the yard. Now let's take a look at the sentence a little bit more in detail. The which is what we call the antecedent. The which is our relative pronoun. And the which is actually dependent upon what we call the antecedent. The antecedent literally breaks down to before falls. So it's the noun that falls before that who, which, that word. And if we take a look in our sentence, the antecedent would then be cat, because the which is referring to cat. Now we also said that a relative pronoun functions to hold itself in as a subordinate clause. Which smells bad is a subordinate clause. It cannot stand alone as a main sentence. And a subordinate clause really is a group of words that have a subject and verb, but can't stand as a complete thought. Which smells bad is not a complete sentence. Now the case or function of the relative pronoun depends upon how it's going to be used in that subordinate clause. And remember, by subordinate clause, we mean the part that can't stand alone as a sentence. So we're going to now break this down to figure out what case in Latin would which be. The first thing you want to do is replace the relative pronoun with the antecedent. So I'm going to take the cat, plug it in for which, and I have the cat smells bad. Well, once I replace the cat from which, the cat in this new sentence is working as my subject. So therefore, if I were to write this in Latin, which would have to be in the nominative case. Now we're going to go through every single case to show you an example of how this works. Hannibal, whose soldiers were fierce, fought against Rome. Well, the first thing you should do is identify the relative pronoun, and that's whose. Next, identify the antecedent, that noun that falls before, Hannibal. Now we want to replace the relative pronoun with the antecedent. So we get Hannibal, soldiers were fierce. That makes no sense. So instead we might have to tweak our translation and say Hannibal's soldiers were fierce. So if we plug Hannibal in for whose, we then find out that whose is working as the genitive because it's showing possession. The boys, to whom the story was told, were happy. Let's go through the same steps. Find the relative pronoun, to whom, find the antecedent, the boys, and now we're going to replace the relative pronoun with the antecedent, which means we're going to replace the boys with to whom, so we get to boys the story was told, or to the boys the story was told. Well, in Latin we know that if something is told to someone, That makes it the indirect object or the dative case. So this form of to whom would be dative in a Latin sentence. Caesar, whom I saw walking in the forum, was bald. The relative pronoun is whom, antecedent is Caesar. Plug Caesar in for whom, and we get Caesar I saw walking in the forum. We need to rearrange that a little bit, and it's now I saw Caesar walking in the forum. Based on what we know about cases, then this is working as our direct object, the accusative, because it's translated after our main verb. And finally, the horse on which he rode was majestic. Relative pronoun is on which, antecedent, horse. Replace it, on horse he rode, so he rode on the horse. We know that on normally takes the ablative after it because of the object of the preposition. So on which up here would be represented by the ablative case. When writing a Latin relative pronoun, we are going to need to know more than just the case to indicate which form we're going to use. We also need to include gender, number, and case. Now, each of these aspects is determined by something. Gender and number is based upon what the antecedent is. So if your antecedent is man, then you know your gender is masculine, your number is singular. However, case, as we saw in the beginning, it's determined by its function in the relative clause or that subordinate clause. So if we take a look at a sentence, the emperor whom the Senate feared strode down the road, we see that our relative pronoun is whom. The antecedent is emperor. So let's get those first two pieces of information from the antecedent. Gender is going to be masculine, and number then would be singular. Now we have to figure out the case of whom, and by doing that we're going to plug emperor in for whom. So then we have the emperor the Senate feared. But that's not really an English word order, so we have to rearrange it to say the Senate feared the emperor. So in that case, it would then be accusative. So now we need to look at the actual forms of the relative pronoun in Latin, and you want to make sure that you're copying these down correctly. Here are your charts, singular up here and plural down here, for your relative pronoun, and all of these forms mean who, which, that, etc. in their respective cases. If you notice, this is also an IUS form, just like we've been studying in class. The declining pattern is very similar to everything that we've done so far. When we go down to the plurals, though, there are two things we need to pay attention to. The neuters are AE for nominative, and instead of using is for the dative and ablative, we use the ibus form of the dative and ablative. So now that we've taken a look at the charts, let's see how we could figure out the relative pronoun to use in the sentence. The emperor whom the Senate feared strode down the road. We already identified whom as the relative pronoun, and we learned from the previous a couple minutes that it was masculine, singular, and accusative. So now let's match them up on the chart. We know that this is the singular chart over here. We're going to isolate the masculine column and go down to the accusative form. And if we were to write this sentence in Latin, that relative pronoun would have to be quem. So in the end, today we saw that relative pronouns link two sentences together that share a similar noun. The case of the relative pronoun is determined by its function in the subordinate clause. The gender and number then are determined by the antecedent. We are going to do a lot of work with this in class, so please come prepared with your notes, and we're going to make sure we can master this concept.